Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, and welcome to our second Seeds of Justice for 2023. My name is Matthew Baird. I'm the Director of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law. And in this episode, we will continue our examination of the Environmental Human Rights Defenders Toolkit developed by UN Environment Programme with the Asia Pacific Network for Environmental Defenders and a number of other environmental defenders. And that toolkit, as we looked at last episode with Katinka and Jose Paulo, we looked at some of the issues surrounding environmental human rights defense and why the toolkit was developed. And so we would like to welcome back Jose Paulo. Welcome back again from the Asia Pacific Network for Environmental Defenders. It's great to have you back. And thank you again for joining us on this really important topic about the Environmental Human Rights Defenders Toolkit. And I'm just wondering, last time we did the overall toolkit itself, and we'll provide you with a link for that. And later on in this episode, we're going to talk to Sayed of Frontline Defenders about some of the risk assessment tools. But I'm wondering if you can let us know or talk about some of the help or assistance or opportunities that are available for environmental and human rights defenders in this region of Asia Pacific.
Thank you, Matthew. So again, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone, to all of our viewers. So so for your question, Matthew, that's actually a very good one. In the toolkit, there are numerous sources, lists of support for defenders that is contained within the toolkit, and it has been categorized into themes. And I'll just give some examples of, let's say, resources that our defenders can tap into to get support. So first, we have organizations that can give emergency support for defenders, let's say, who are in need of relocation, who needs to travel, medical costs, and of course, as well as legal aid. And an example of that is Protect Defenders, EU. They are an organization that provides financial grants for various purposes. Again, travel, medical costs, security measures. They have actually two grants, two kinds of grants that defenders can use. They have grants for emergency support, such as when their lives are at risk or they're under threat. And then they have another kind of grant, which is for temporary relocation, so that if ever defenders need to move away from their current location because it's in conflict or it's in a very dangerous context position, they can inquire that kind of service from Protect Defenders EU to be able to have some temporary relocation for themselves and for their family as well. Then there are others that can give other support, like, because right now we are in an age of information technology, social media. So there are organizations as well that provides digital security support, such as Digital Security Helpline. It provides defenders digital security assessments, instructions, how to improve their modes of communication, especially with emails, chats, and apps. And also, they can give support for technical infrastructure. So, of course, for Wi-Fi, let's say mobile data of some sorts, and lots of digital security training. And another kind of support, which is very crucial for defenders, is for campaigns and advocacy. And of course, I'd like to give a spotlight on my network, AppNet. It is a solidarity network within Asia and the Pacific. And then you can contact us if you need any technical help in how to raise more awareness for your campaigns, for it to be spread out within our network, and of course with our partner organizations as well. So just some
And I
kinds
guess,
of.
Jose, Jose Paulo, I guess, this is all contained in module 4 in the
Yes.
tool, all of these sort of resources. And that seems to focus on both preventative ideas, how to keep out of trouble, but all things going to happen, that there is support for environmental and human rights defenders. There are organisations, including APNET, composed of EHRDs that are there and that people can reach out to for support and assistance. And so, obviously, one of those key issues is trying to avoid or minimise the risk. And so we'll come back a bit later, because I'd like to talk just a bit more about, the overall aims now of the toolkit. What are you planning on doing? But next, I would like to actually introduce Saeed from Frontline Defenders, because we can talk now on what is obviously very, very important to environment human rights defenders, and that is actually how to minimise or avoid the risk or the chances of that the activity, the work that we do, will cause us conflict with people who want to do us harm. So hi, Saeed. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Matthew.
Great to have you
Thanks
here.
for inviting.
First of all, would you like to introduce yourself and your organization to our viewers?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to viewers. So I work with an organization called Frontline Defenders. It's a global organization based in Ireland, and I am the coordinator for Southeast Asia and the Pacific within the organization. So the organization Frontline Defenders is, primarily focused on the safety and protection of human rights defenders. And of course, if we look at the data and statistics given by different organizations, even from our own research, we can see that environmental defenders not just in Asia Pacific, but at the global level are like topmost high risk defenders. And hence, if we look at our support and activities around defenders, we can see that a lot we are actually doing around the safety and protection of human rights and environmental human rights defenders.
And Saeed, I mean, we discussed in our previous episode with Katinka that things seem to be getting worse for environmental human rights defenders, those who are trying to protect. I mean, is that the experience worldwide, or is it just in Asia and Pacific that it seems to be getting more challenging?
I agree, Matthew, because the reason is because environmental defenders, the way they work and the issues they cover, actually brings more opponents in a way. So it's not just the state, but it corporates. It's like private influential people. So a lot of if we look at the spectrum of ally and your opponents, environmental defenders, unfortunately, because of that work, by default, there are a lot of opponents, and opponents are becoming more and more strong in terms of they are also, and they work sometimes, most of the times, in collaboration with each other. So that makes it very difficult for environmental defenders, and they put them are very, very at risk.
And I guess because you're, as an environmental defender, you're trying to protect something, communities or the environment, you do come into conflict from those who are wanting to try and destroy it or turn it into profit. So they, of course, clearly can exercise a certain degree of control. I also wonder if the methods that are being used are becoming more dangerous. I mean, we hear stories about not only people being threatened, but families being threatened, violence, as well as assassination, and whether it's journalists themselves who are reporting on events, or activists who are merely trying to protect their family and their community and their environment. So it seems that the tools that others are using, the methods that are becoming more and more violent as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like in our work in frontline defenders, when we work for the protection of human rights defenders, something like, we used to say is like, because you can't really like provide full protection to someone as an organization, or like, you can't really protect everyone. So the message we want to give is like, protect one, but empower thousands. So by actually protecting one, you can like give a message to thousand others that it's possible that you are not alone. I think like this kind of a, like the other side of this being used by the perpetrators. So the perpetrators, while they want to actually target one, and by this they want to terrorize thousands. So the means they use is like sometimes too severe. Like we know the number of killing of environmental defenders. So they want to give a message to thousand others and the whole community and the whole movement, to terrorize them actually by targeting like one or two or number of people. So I think like this we have to keep in mind, that whether it's one number, but it's actually the aim is to actually targeting thousand or like even more.
Right. So while the opponents might want to terrorize, threaten one to terrorize 1,000, we're about protecting one and empowering thousands. So providing the strong support for people to keep doing this very vital work. That's really an exciting but challenging thing. So turning now to the toolkit. I think one of the things about this toolkit is that it's trying very much to provide practical support. And Jose Paulo talked about organizations that are available in the event of these challenges. But risk assessment and thinking about how we do risk assessment. So I guess that question I have is, in the toolkit, what is the risk assessment, and how can organizations or individual defenders conduct a risk assessment? Key issues there.
Yeah, that's what I would say at the very beginning is like, such toolkit is very important, because for different reason. The reason number one is, sometimes as human rights defender, we don't really focus on our own safety, primarily because sometimes we don't get that time. Sometimes like we think that like looking at ourselves is a selfish approach, because we are like working for others, and like now we are looking at ourselves. So that's not a good approach. Sometimes also we feel that yes, we are vulnerable, or we are under threat, but we don't want to like expose that. We don't want to show it, feeling that maybe like the people we are working for, or the community members who are considering us as leader, they might be like more terrorized, because knowing this, it would hamper their moral. So for different reason, actually we don't really focus on our own safety and security. So this kind of toolkit is really important to really guide us and like reflect on us sometimes, because it's very important. Because if we are not well, if we don't exist, then like the work we are doing, we can't do it. And like our existence is so important to give the same message, no, to empower thousands more, that like we exist, we can struggle, and then there are ways of like reflecting on our own safety and security. From that aspect, I would say like this kind of toolkit is really, really important. And if we look at the toolkit, it gives us like two different set of like methods of like looking at our situation when it comes of like assessing our risk, or the situation we work around. The first one is the risk formula. I think like it's quite important. Of course, like risk is not a like mathematical term that you can calculate this in this way, but at least this formula would help us to like look at what are the potential risks we may have, and how we can address them. So the formula tells us like, let's go to the few terminologies first. So risk is basically is something, is a potential possibility of harm The harm could be our physical harm, the harm could be our mental or harm on our well-being. So the risk means that there will be a possibility of such kind of harm. The threat is something which has to be some way declared, either directly or indirectly. Someone may make a phone call to us, someone may send us a letter, someone may tell our other colleague or friends that something would happen to me. So different ways can be, but it has to be declared, it has to be proclaimed.
Right.
Exactly.
So all types of threats, like that could be any.
All types of threat. Yeah. So it has to be like proclaimed or declared somehow. Then the other term here we described in the toolkit is the vulnerability. The vulnerability means is not nothing that like we are weak or something, but it's a reality that the way we are, there are some inherent like might be vulnerability for us, and not always it's a weakness for us. For example, like I may be not in a good health than many others. I might be a person with disability. It's not a vulnerability that like is I am liable for it, but it's good to consider this. Or it's a vulnerability that I'm poor. It's a vulnerability that I live in a very rural area. It could be a vulnerability that I doesn't have a like well connectivity with my support mechanism very immediately. So it can be different things, but it's good to understand that as human being, or as where we are working, even like maybe we are working very deep inside a forest, so it has some inherent vulnerability for myself. So because of my work, I also like bring some vulnerability with me. So that's not my fault, but it's that's the reality we have to like calculate when we do the risk assessment. And then of course we talk about the capacity, and the capacity also again could be many things. What like our friend like said about the protect defenders or other support mechanism, or the campaign opportunities we have, these all are capacity. My individual connectivity with different support mechanism is also my capacity. My capacity to like have this risk assessment, be aware of this kind of risk assessment, uh, be aware of a better planning, making a better planning ahead, is all this about capacity. And we have to consider that like our opponents are like in different way, they are more powerful in a sense, because they can carry arm, they can be like supported by the state, by the paralegals, by the paramilitary, by different forces. On the other hand, our strength is only our community, our like our colleagues, our surroundings, that's all. And because of human rights defenders, of course we can't be like violent, we have to take a peaceful way. So the best capacity for us is like to strengthen ourselves in terms of our knowledge, our awareness, our practice, our connectivity. So I think that this is very important. And if I quickly talk about, yeah, Matthew.
Yes. No, I just, in terms of, you mentioned that connectivity, it seems also that that's quite a powerful tool in today's thing. I prior to the coup in Myanmar, or after the coup in Myanmar, I had a number of friends, and one of the key issues was the connectivity, so that people knew where everyone was, or and if they went to an area or they were doing something that caused risk, people wanted to know, where to get simple things. If I'm going out, when I'm coming back. If I'm going into the community or the contested area, when am I coming back? How am I? And if there was a problem, we had sort of networks, old-fashioned telephone trees, but I think now done on Telegram or elsewhere, to contact people to highlight those sort of potential vulnerabilities. Is it fair to say, and I'm sorry that I interrupted, is it fair to say that often one of the best means of defense or support is actually shining lights and spotlights that people know that, there is attention. People do know what the defender is doing, and if there's any issues with their safety, the spotlight goes on the corporate or the person who might benefit from the harassment or action against the defender.
Absolutely, Matthew. I mean, I think like the opponents of human rights defenders always try to do like what is like putting human rights defenders in isolation. The more and more they can isolate them, they become more vulnerable. So that's the strategy they take. Like the much they can isolate them, and we have seen like multiple. We can give multiple examples. Like the quickest human rights defenders could like get the news out that like this is the risky situation they are in, or like they are detained, or they are arrested, or they are in such a situation where they feel that their life is at risk. It saved their life. It really saved their life. Like the quickest they could like convey this message out to the world. Because we have to understand that our opponents are like it could be very bad, but everyone wants to have a like good face. So like no one wants to be like ashamed like in front of the world. So they want to do bad thing very quietly. So the opponent strategy should be like how much we publicize and shame them, name them, and that works many times. And this all depends on how much connectivity you have, and sometimes even mobilizing support for you also necessary. So if you get the information to your community in a quickest method, if you have a like buddy system, as Matthew you explained, like when I'm going to some risky place, but I letting someone know that this is the place I'm going. I'm setting up a communication protocol with the trusted person. Like probably like every 1 hour we will communicate, and then when my buddy would not get any communication from me in like more than 1 hour, then the bell alarms, and then like my buddy may take some action, which may at the end save my life. So this is really, really important.
And so I think the one thing about the toolkit that I also saw is that there are a number of different areas that you could do risk assessment. That it wasn't just your physical security, but your office security, home security, or your digital security. Securing your information, and often these days on a computer or a phone. Is there any one of those that you would prioritize, or how would you sort of think which is the most important? How does an environmental human rights defender sort of start that risk assessment?
I would say like it's difficult to really prioritize. I think everything what you have mentioned is important, and the most important thing is like analyzing the particular situation and the context. One difficult job I would say is like risk assessment or like protection planning is something an ongoing thing. It's not just like we have something written on the paper and it would work always. We have a protocol, standard operating protocol, and like it would, when there is a difficult situation, it would automatically work. Things doesn't work in that way. It's a toll on us. Like beside our ongoing work, we have to like sit back and think and take some time to plan our own safety as well, because of doing the work in a better way and safer way. But this should be an ongoing, and it has to be in the practice. So sometimes even like small things can make a huge difference in our office, or like where we can prioritize our documents, like most sensitive documents and like less sensitive documents, and just segregate it in a like different ways, not keeping everything in one place. These are not huge work, but it needs a bit of planning. Or sometimes like on a particular situation or particular area, we are going for a work which might invite more like risk, then maybe we need to be better prepared. So what I would say, like it has to be a like ongoing process with our daily life. And not to take much stress of it, like okay, we have to plan this, we have to plan not that. but like just in the thinking process. And I think one other thing I would say, Matthew, is very, very important is the looking at the well-being side of it also. Like sometimes we ignore the mental side of the risk assessment. Sometimes we very much focus on physical side or digital side, but we have to also understand that while focusing on this, like, and thinking, going to this thought process of like digital security, physical security may bring some like additional stress on our mental side also. And if we don't make a balance out of it, then like it may put us in paranoia, and that would not help us in any way. And in a very difficult situation, the main important thing is like keeping our head calm and thinking like try to think like what is the best to do. And for that we have to also be prepared on a like good mental strength, and we have to like whatever plan we are doing, not putting us in extra burden or extra pressure, but looking at our own well-being. And yeah, not just own, but like as a community, as a group, also thinking through that.
I mean, that's one of the things that struck me from looking at the modules, is that it's designed to be practical and realistic. So, the risk assessment, many things small things can be done just to make it easier and make your life safer. Like that, we do that every day, whether we're in a car and we have a seatbelt, or we follow we cross the road at the right, when there isn't traffic coming, all those sort of things. But it also focuses on that need to be healthy mentally, and to whether you've got family or colleagues or other campaigners, you work together. And if people are feeling stressed or anxious or too concerned, that is also a sign, or a risk that needs to be managed, because obviously many of us are doing things that cause a great deal of stress for us and for our families as defenders.
Yep, and we all know in the it's more used in the war dictionary, is that knowing your enemies. I think like it's also very important for us is like knowing our opponents well, and thinking like our opponents, like what they want us to do. So maybe like they want us to be silent, they want us to not to do the work we are doing, they want us to do the work differently. So thinking in that way, and also like sometimes thinking their capacity also, that helps us in doing our own risk assessment, like how much capacity they have, our opponents, and not ignoring their capacity. Sometimes like would help us to do our planning effectively.
And presumably also not overstating their capacity, because but always being sort of practical and aware of the risk, not overstating the risk or getting too worried about things that are not specifically actual risks. I mean, one of the things I just also I'm sort of noticed that the time is moving away from us, because I think this is just such an important topic. But one of the things in the toolkit, it also does have some mention of some procedures that are available for not only defenders but their organisations and supporters if something does untoward happen. Just wondering, what can you sort of identify some of those procedures that are referenced in the toolkit if something does go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is always said, I think like the first special rapporteur on human rights defender, she mentioned, is that the best protection comes from your own community. So I think like this is very powerful and very important. Like any risk assessment, of course you can do individually, and in some occasion you might need to do it individually, but if you can make it a collective thing, if you belong to a community, if you are at risk because of a community work and your whole community is at risk, then it's always good is that doing this risk assessment as a collective process, and then it's not your own liabilities, because your support mechanism is actually plenty, and everyone needs to be like, aware of it. And sometimes also like, because we work collectively, and if like, one of our colleague, let's say, is not maintaining certain procedure effectively, that may put like, many others at risk also. So it has a collective approach. So I think like the most important, and that the toolkit would also tell us, is that how we can plan something collectively, discuss something collectively, and even like, the procedure we take as a collective measures. Sometimes also it's important, I said that, it's not a something just written in the paper, but something, a guideline, written something, at least if it's an organizational level, or if it's at a community level, something as a procedure is also good. Or at least like, it has to be clear that if something happens, then what is the like, what is the procedure, what others would do. Otherwise it happens like, we are not aware of something happen, and then what is our role, and then we try to figure out like, what can be our response and something. So some kind of guideline, of course it's not something written on a stone and like, have to follow in that way. It has to be contextualized, but some procedure helps within organization, within community, at least to be responsive on certain situation. Because quick response, as we said, is really matters. The most quickest way we can respond, it may like, help our colleagues life also. So something like this is really important, and I think the toolkit is appropriately talking about that as well.
And the toolkit does have a number of tables and checklists and recommendations, including, of course, making sure that someone outside your organization can access this, because obviously if it happens to an organization, you need someone else outside to be able to sort of work through your checklist and have access to sort of that emergency. So you need friends outside your organization who might be able to have those contacts or those and understand what the process is. So say, look, I really want to say I could talk for a lot longer on this. I think the toolkit has got so much enormous information for environmental human rights defenders, and hope we roll it out with sort of training workshops that sort of helps organizations practically understand all the different types of security. But just as sort of a last question, I guess, what do you hope this toolkit can do? And really, I think also for human rights defenders, what is the Frontline Defenders organization? What's your hope for the future for environmental human rights defenders, at least in the short term, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, like I personally, and as organization, we are very optimist in that way. We know that the situation for human rights defenders in general, and particularly environmental defenders, is very, very tough right at this moment. But the other side is that because our opponents are coming hard on us because we are doing good work, that it shows also that we are doing good work. And it also shows that our opponents are like, their lack of confidence. Because when someone come too hard on you, means that their standpoint, their moral standpoint is weak. So that gives us a strength that like we are really doing good work, and we are in upper side. But then of course the backlash is that we have to face more and more threats and risks. So that's why this kind of toolkit is really, really important to help us to go through a thought process. Like sometimes, as in the beginning I said, that we really don't get such time, or like we don't get such encouragement to sit and think of like this. But this kind of toolkit can help us to guide as a community or as a group to go some thought process, and like take some precautionary measures which would help us to be better protected and to do our work in a more effective way. I think like that's very important. And yeah, I mean, like as organization, I can say that we are our mandate is for the safety and protection of human rights defenders. So we'll be happy to be connected with any human rights defender and try to do our best whenever there is a difficult situation faced by human rights defenders.
Syed, thank you so much for your time, and again, congratulations. Thank you for all your work, and more importantly, the idea of these networks as we are stronger, together, and connectivity really does matter. So really appreciate your time, and thank you again, and good luck for the future. Maybe we'll have you back in the next 6 months to see how this has helped environmental human rights defenders in Asia and the Pacific. Thank you again. And so finally, I'm going to bring back Jose Paulo in terms of just sort of with the Asia Pacific Network for Environmental Defenders. Again, another network of activists and people working on the defenders, speaking with Syed, what would be your message for people to use the toolkit, in terms of going forward?
So thank you, Matthew and Saeed, for that. So I would just like to say that what Saeed mentioned, that we have to empower our communities, and I think that's such a very important and crucial element in the line of work that defenders do. So I hope that through this toolkit, that we hope that we are able to improve the capacities, the strengths of defenders in Asia and the Pacific, and through that kind of improvement and capacity building, they are empowered to continue their work, to mount stronger efforts for the campaigns that they are involved in, and of course for the protection of our environment, and of course human rights as well. And in the future, I guess throughout this toolkit, I hope this becomes a very good source of reference, a tool for every environmental human rights defenders, that that I hope it is valuable for them, and that it is to help them with the work that we do. And in the next few years, hopefully we have a stronger movement for EHRDs in Asia and the Pacific towards upholding our environmental and human rights for everyone, not just for defenders, but for everyone.
That's a great message to end these two episodes on the Environmental Human Rights Defenders Toolkits. And I mean, I should say, over the last few years, as I've seen friends be arrested, go to jail, be threatened, I realize that this is something that is, it is a daily occurrence for so many people doing their amazing work in terms of protecting the planet and their communities. So I really say thank you very much. One of the other elements within this toolkit is sort of access to some of the formal mechanisms of the UN and elsewhere for environmental human rights defenders that are at risk. And we've had previously, we've had Romchat from Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights in Bangkok talking about this. And I think that might be something that we might actually do a separate webinar on later this year, where we can actually talk about some of those mechanisms that might be available both in the UN system and some of the support mechanisms and networks that we have here. Maybe until that time, I will sort of say again, thank you very much, Saeed, for your assistance, and Jose Paulo for your appearance on 2 episodes. We really thank you. Thank all the presenters and also all the authors of this report. Our Seeds of Justice webinar series will continue over this year, where we have a number of different topics. So please join up, follow our newsletter, and look forward to the next episodes as they come out, and also our environmental law webinars. And hopefully towards the end of this year, with an environmental law conference, we can bring people together to discuss the great work being done by environmental human rights defenders and some of the extraordinary environmental law issues that impact us in Southeast Asia. Again, Syed, Jose Paulo, thank you so much for your time, and good luck, stay healthy, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.